Don't worry, sir. I've got it. This is my money, not the store's. The grocery store was packed on a Tuesday afternoon. Long lines, impatient people, everyone just trying to get through their day and get home. An old man stood at register 5. Brown tweed jacket, slightly worn at the elbows. A small handbasket, canned soup, crackers, orange juice, instant oatmeal. Simple things. Quiet things. The things a man buys when he's eating alone. He reached into his jacket pocket. Then his pants pocket. Then his jacket again. His hands were trembling, not from nerves, but from age. 80 years of living in these hands. 80 years of building something from nothing. I don't understand, he said softly to the cashier. His white brows knitted together. I had it right here. I always keep it right here. Behind him, a sharp sigh cut through the air like a blade. Oh, for heaven's sake. The blonde woman in the patterned blouse checked her smartwatch and shifted her designer bag from one shoulder to the other. Her cart was full. Her patience was empty. It's 2026. Who even forgets a wallet anymore? Use your phone or move it along, Gramps. Some of us have actual places to be. A few people in line looked away. A few others looked at their shoes. The store manager appeared from behind the customer service desk, already grimacing. Sir, if you're not able to complete the transaction, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside so I can keep the line. Everyone was watching. Everyone was deciding what this old man was worth based on what he couldn't find in his pocket. And then the cashier did something nobody in that line expected. The young black woman behind the register. Gray polo, black apron, small silver cross at her collarbone. Didn't look at the manager. Didn't look at the woman with the smartwatch. She looked at the old man, and she reached into the front pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded bill. Creased down the middle. Her grocery money for the week. She smoothed it on the counter. She paid for his things. And the old man looked at her, really looked at her, and what he did next made the entire store go completely still. My name is Edward Warren. I founded Warren's Market 53 years ago. I own this register. I own this store. I own every store with this name on the door from Maine to Connecticut. And I came here today without my wallet on purpose. Now let me tell you why. Before I tell you what happened next, if you believe that kindness is the most powerful force in any room, stay with me. Because what Patricia Peterson did with a crumpled bill is about to change everything. For this company, for her future, and for a lonely old man who had almost stopped believing his life's work meant anything at all. Back to where it really began. The penthouse on the 38th floor of the Warren building had 14 rooms. Edward knew this because he had counted them. Twice. Once the week after the funeral, walking the halls at 2 in the morning in his socks. And once again on a Sunday in February when the snow outside made the city go quiet and the silence inside felt like it had weight. 14 rooms. And not one of them had anyone in it but him. Martha had filled them without trying. That was the thing about her. She never decorated a room. She just walked into it and it became warmer. 51 years of marriage, and Edward had never once come home to a house that felt empty. Now he came home to nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the grandfather clock she picked out at an antique fair in Vermont in 1987. He kept it wound. He didn't know why. Habit, maybe, or something closer to hope. His assistant, Carol, had left a quarterly earnings report on the dining table that morning. Warren's Market, $2.3 billion in revenue last fiscal year. 14% growth. Profit margins up across all regions. He had read every page and felt absolutely nothing. He set it down next to a coffee that had gone cold and looked out across the Boston skyline, and he thought about the fact that Martha used to make him eggs on Saturday mornings and call him old man, even when he wasn't yet old, and that he would trade every number on that report for one more Saturday morning in their kitchen on Beacon Hill, before the money, before the empire, before all of it. His reflection stared back at him from the floor-to-ceiling glass. An old man in a bathrobe. That's all. He thought about what his company had become. Efficient, profitable, cold. He thought about whether any of it had been worth building if the people inside it had stopped caring about people. He went to the closet, found the old tweed jacket, put it on. The jacket was in the back of the walk-in closet. Behind 3 wool overcoats and a garment bag he hadn't unzipped since Martha's last Christmas party. Brown tweed, slightly worn at the elbows, a small brass button missing on the left cuff. He had bought it in 1974 at a department store in Providence when he was 28 years old and had exactly one good jacket to his name. Back then he wore it to bank meetings, trying to look like a man who already had money instead of a man desperately trying to borrow some. He put it on. It still fit. Looser than it used to be. He had lost weight since Martha, the way grieving men do, quietly and without noticing. But it fit. He stood in front of the mirror and looked at himself for a long moment. Not the founder of Warren's Market. Not the man on the Forbes list. Just an old man in a brown tweed jacket who looked like he might forget where he parked. Good. That was exactly right. He left his phone on the kitchen counter. Left his corporate card in the drawer. Took $60 in cash from the envelope Martha used to keep in the cookie jar for what she called real-life emergencies. Taxis, tips, the occasional parking meter. He folded it and put it in his inside breast pocket. Then he reached back in and took it out again, and put it in his pants pocket instead, leaving the jacket pocket deliberately, pointedly empty. He took the service elevator down so he wouldn't pass the lobby security desk. Walked out the side entrance onto Beacon Street. The morning air hit him and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. No driver, no detail, no Carol with a schedule. Just Edward. And the city. And a question he needed answered. The flagship store on 5th Street was 11 blocks away. He decided to walk. It was the kind of decision Martha would have called foolish and then grabbed her coat to join him anyway. He smiled at that. First time in weeks. He started walking. The city didn't notice him. That was the first thing he learned in those 11 blocks. A younger man in a suit cut in front of him at the crosswalk without looking up from his phone. A woman with a stroller moved around him the way you move around a mailbox. Automatically, without acknowledgement. A group of college students split around him like a river around a rock. Their conversation never breaking. Their eyes never meeting his. He had walked these same streets for 40 years as Edward Warren, and heads had turned. Hands had extended. People had smiled the particular smile that meant they recognized him or wanted something from him. Now he was just a slow old man in a brown jacket, and the city moved around him like he was furniture. He wasn't angry about it. He was something quieter than angry, something closer to sad. He reached the store on 5th Street just after 10 in the morning. Warren's Market, flagship location. His name was on the sign in the same font Martha had approved in 1987, navy blue on cream. He stood outside for a moment and looked at it the way you look at something you built with your hands and haven't visited in a long time. Then he walked in. The automatic doors opened and the first thing he noticed was the music. A corporate playlist, relentlessly cheerful, calibrated to keep customers moving. The second thing he noticed was that nobody greeted him. There was a greeter's podium right inside the entrance, a detail he had insisted on when they designed the flagship 20 years ago. It was empty. He walked the aisles slowly. The shelves were immaculate. The signage was sharp and professionally done. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. The store was a machine, precise, efficient, and almost entirely without warmth. 2 employees passed him in the cereal aisle. Neither made eye contact. One was on a headset. The other was checking a clipboard. Edward stopped and watched them go. He had built this. All of it. He just hadn't meant for it to feel like this. Patricia Peterson had been on her feet since 6 in the morning, and it was not yet noon. She was running Register 5 on 4 hours of sleep and a gas station coffee that had stopped working somewhere around the 2nd hour of her shift. Her phone was in her apron pocket and she had checked it twice already. Not for messages, but for the nursing school financial aid portal, which had been processing her application for 11 days and counting. 11 days of checking. 11 days of the same spinning wheel. Tuition was due in 3 weeks and she had $340 in her checking account and a grandmother at home who needed insulin and a landlord who did not do extensions. But when the next customer stepped up to her register, Patricia smiled. A real one, not a performed one. That was just who she was. Her grandmother Loretta had raised her on 2 things, faith and manners, and Patricia wore both of them the same way she wore the small silver cross at her collarbone. Quietly, consistently, without making a show of it. She was scanning a box of crackers when she heard the cart first. It was the sound of someone moving through a store like they owned it, wheels turning fast, sharp corners, the particular energy of a person who has decided in advance that everything around them is an inconvenience. Patricia didn't look up immediately. She didn't need to. Brenda Van Doren came around the end of the aisle like a weather system. Mid-40s, blonde hair that moved as one piece. A patterned blouse that probably cost more than Patricia's monthly take-home. Her cart was stacked high, and her expression was the expression of someone who had been slightly irritated since birth and had simply learned to live with it. She took one look at the length of Register 5's line, exhaled audibly through her nose, and joined it anyway, positioning herself with the body language of someone who had already decided this was going to be someone else's fault. Patricia kept smiling, kept scanning. Lord, she thought, give me patience. Edward reached the front of the line at 11:43. He set his small basket on the belt, the soup, the crackers, the orange juice, the instant oatmeal, and looked up at the young woman behind the register. She had kind eyes, tired but kind. The kind of tired that comes not from laziness but from carrying too much for too long. She gave him a smile that he could tell she meant, and he thought, there it is. There's still one. Good morning, he said. Good morning, sir. Find everything okay today? I did, thank you. She began scanning his items. Edward waited until the total appeared on the small screen, $45.12, and then he reached into his jacket pocket, patted it, reached into the other one, frowned slightly, moved to his pants pocket, then back to the jacket. His brow furrowed the way it does when something genuinely doesn't add up. He had put the cash in his pants pocket. He knew that, but he needed this moment to breathe, to be real, to be witnessed. Behind him, Brenda Van Doren had been watching for approximately 15 seconds before she ran out of patience, which, by Edward's estimate, was about 14 seconds longer than he expected. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Not under her breath. Not even close to under her breath. Loud enough for the 3 people behind her to hear. Loud enough for the couple at Register 6 to turn their heads. It's 2026. You have a phone, don't you? There's no reason in the world a person should be standing at a register in 2026 unable to pay. Patricia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A young store manager in an ill-fitting suit materialized from somewhere near the customer service desk. Phone still in his hand, eyes still on the screen. He glanced at the situation the way you glance at a warning light you've decided to ignore. Sir, if there's an issue with payment, we'd ask that you step aside and let the line move. Edward looked at him, then at Brenda, then back at Patricia. Nobody moved. The whole line held its breath. Patricia had watched the whole thing unfold the way you watch a car slide on ice, knowing what's coming, hoping you're wrong, and moving before it fully stops. She didn't look at Brenda, didn't look at the manager. She looked at the old man's hands, still patting that empty pocket, his shoulders carrying the particular stiffness of a person trying very hard not to look embarrassed in public, and she made her decision before she had fully finished making it. Don't worry, sir. Her voice was calm, even. The same voice she used with her grandmother when the medical bills came. I've got it. She reached into the front pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded bill. It was creased down the middle and soft at the edges the way money gets when it's been handled a lot and replaced slowly. $30. Her gas money for the week. She had budgeted it out on Sunday night at the kitchen table. 15 to get to work, 15 to get to class. And she had folded it exactly like that and put it in her apron that morning the way you pack something you know you're going to need. She smoothed it on the counter with 2 fingers. Patricia. The manager said her name like a warning. Store policy doesn't allow. It's my money. She said it without looking at him. Not the store's. She counted out the remainder in coins from the same pocket, quarters, a dime, 2 pennies, and slid the full amount across to the register. $45.12. Exact. Then she began bagging his items. Soup, crackers, orange juice, oatmeal. She placed each one in carefully, the way you pack a bag for someone you're sending home safe. The line was completely silent. Brenda had stopped talking. The manager had stopped moving. Even the corporate playlist seemed to fade back into the ceiling. Edward watched Patricia's hands. Steady, unhurried, unbothered. He felt something crack open quietly in the center of his chest. Something that had been closed for 3 years. Edward picked up his bag. He turned toward the exit the way he had come in. Slowly, deliberately, an old man with groceries and nowhere urgent to be. He took 4 steps. Then he stopped. The store kept its ambient noise for exactly 3 more seconds. The playlist. The distant beep of another register. Someone's cartwheel on the tile. Then Edward turned around. Something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No straightening of the spine. No sudden squaring of the shoulders. It was subtler than that and somehow more unsettling. The frailty was simply gone. Like a coat he had taken off. The man walking back toward Register 5 moved with the quiet, unhurried authority of someone who had run board meetings for 5 decades and never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. He set his bag back on the counter. He looked at Patricia first, then at Brenda, then at the young manager who was still holding his phone, though he wasn't looking at it anymore. Then Edward reached into the inside breast pocket of the old tweed jacket, not the empty one, the other one, and pressed a small black card against the side of the register screen. A store system override card. The kind that existed in exactly one wallet in the entire Warren's Market organization. At the customer service desk, a phone rang. Then another. A woman in a blue Warren's Market blazer looked up from her monitor and went very still. 2 men in plain clothes who had been shopping at opposite ends of the store for the past 40 minutes moved toward Register 5 without being told. They didn't run. They didn't need to. The automatic doors at the front of the store stayed open. But nobody left. Edward looked at the line of people who had watched a young woman give away her gas money while every one of them stood with their hands in their pockets. He let the silence sit for a moment. Let it mean something. Then, quietly and without theater, he said it. My name is Edward Warren. I founded this company. I own this store. He paused. And I have been standing in your line for the last 20 minutes watching what this place has become. The playlist cut out. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The whole store froze. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. Edward looked at Brenda Van Doren with the measured, unhurried calm of a man who has fired executives and closed deals and buried his wife and come out the other side of all of it still standing. Brenda had gone the color of copy paper. Her hand was on her cart handle and her mouth was slightly open, and whatever she had planned to say next had apparently left the building entirely. I heard what you said to this man. Edward's voice was level, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. I heard the word you used. I watched you turn a moment of someone's difficulty into a performance for strangers. He paused. You have every right to be impatient. You do not have the right to be cruel. Brenda opened her mouth. I'm not finished. He said it the way you say it to a board member who is about to make a mistake they can't take back. Quietly, finally, he let one beat of silence land. You may shop elsewhere. A woman 3 people back in line made a sound that was almost a laugh and then immediately pressed her hand over her mouth. The man behind her was holding his phone up. Had been for the last 2 minutes. The little red recording light was on and he wasn't hiding it. Edward turned to Patricia. She hadn't moved from behind the register. She was standing with her hands flat on the counter, her eyes steady, her cross necklace catching the fluorescent light. She looked like someone trying very hard to process something too large for the moment they were standing in. Edward reached into his jacket and placed $46 on the counter. Her gas money. The coins too. This is yours, he said. Then he looked at her for a long moment, the way you look at someone when you want to make sure they understand you mean exactly what you're about to say. You just bought this company's soul back for $45.12. He shook his head slowly, something between disbelief and gratitude. I built these stores. But you built what they were supposed to mean. The video was 47 seconds long. It started with Brenda mid-sentence and ended with Edward's last words to Patricia, and somewhere in the middle it captured the exact moment the playlist cut out and the whole store went still. By midnight it had 2 million views. By Thursday morning it had 14. Every major news outlet ran it by the weekend with variations of the same headline. Grocery chain founder reveals identity after cashier pays his bill with her last dollar. Talk shows debated it. Comment sections argued about Brenda. But mostly people just watched the 47 seconds on repeat. Specifically the part where an 80-year-old man in a worn tweed jacket told a young cashier she had bought back his company's soul. Patricia didn't see any of it until her shift ended. She had kept working register 5 for the remaining 3 hours because somebody had to. 2 weeks later, she received a letter on Warren's Market letterhead. Full nursing school scholarship, tuition, books, fees through graduation, a stipend for living expenses, and a formal offer for a newly created position on the company's board of directors. Employee advocate, reporting directly to the founder. A role whose entire purpose was to make sure that what Edward had seen in his flagship store on 5th Street never quietly became the norm again. Patricia read the letter 3 times at the kitchen table while her grandmother Loretta sat across from her eating toast and pretending not to watch her cry. The first Sunday dinner was Edward's idea. He showed up at their apartment in Dorchester with flowers for Loretta and no security detail and a dish he had apparently attempted to cook himself, which Patricia later described to her coworkers as a brave effort. Loretta put it on the stove and fixed it without comment and set 3 places at the table, and that was that. He came back the following Sunday. And the one after that. He always brought flowers for Loretta. He always stayed too long. And he always drove home in the dark to the penthouse on the 38th floor feeling something he had almost forgotten the name of. Not empty. Not anymore. There is a moment in this story that is easy to miss because it happens quietly, in the middle of everything else. A line of people stand and watch an old man fumble for a wallet he doesn't have. They are not bad people, most of them. They have jobs and families and their own bills folded in their own pockets. But not one of them moves. Not one of them reaches. They simply wait for someone else to do it first. And when nobody does, they decide that waiting was the right choice all along. That is not a grocery store problem. That is a human problem. Psychologists call it diffusion of responsibility, the quieter, more honest name for what happens when a crowd of decent people collectively produces an indecent result. The more people present, the less any single person feels the weight of acting. Everyone assumes someone else will, and so nobody does, except Patricia. What makes Patricia's choice educational is not that it was heroic. It was not. It was $30 and some coins and a decision made in about 4 seconds. What makes it worth studying is that she made it without an audience she was trying to impress, without certainty that it would matter, and without anything left over to spare. That is the only version of generosity that actually costs something, and the only version, this story argues, that is truly worth anything. Edward's journey teaches a different but equally urgent lesson. He built a $2.3 billion company and a quarterly report told him it was thriving. 11 blocks on foot and 20 minutes in his own store told him the truth. There is something in that gap between data and lived reality, between efficiency and humanity, between what an institution measures and what it actually is, that every student, every manager, every person in a position to make decisions about other people's lives needs to sit with seriously. Because systems do not go cold all at once. They go cold one small compromise at a time. An empty greeter's podium. A manager too busy on his phone. A playlist calibrated for throughput instead of comfort. Nobody decided to build a cold company. They just stopped deciding not to. And Brenda. It would be easy to make her the villain and move on. But the more honest reading of Brenda Van Doren is that she is a portrait of what happens when a person measures their own worth entirely through comparison. Through being faster, wealthier, less inconvenienced than the person in front of them. Her cruelty in that checkout line was not really about Edward. It was about her own quiet terror of being ordinary. That terror is worth naming because it lives in all of us to some degree, and the only antidote to it is the thing Patricia had and Brenda didn't, a sense of self that does not depend on anyone else's diminishment. Finally, there is the 47-second video. It changed everything: Patricia's tuition, Brenda's reputation, the national conversation for about a week. But here is the question worth asking. What happens to the next old man who forgets his wallet at a register with no cameras? What happens to the next cashier who gives her last dollar to a stranger who turns out to be exactly who he appears to be? Nobody special, just somebody who needed help. Does she get a scholarship? Does anyone film it? Does the story get told? The real lesson of this story is not what Patricia received. It is what she did before she had any reason to believe she would receive anything at all. That is the only version of character that matters. The version that shows up when the cameras aren't rolling, when the billionaire is just an old man, and when doing the right thing costs you your gas money for the week and gets you nothing but the quiet knowledge that you did it anyway.